Hi, and welcome to Family Gamedev. You've joined us in our first project, creating a Space Invaders clone, and making this game with my 8-year-old son, turned colleague. I'm being a good dad and trying to support his education. Let's take a quick look back at the project so far and the steps that we have taken to get to this point. Like with most things, we started with a discussion. Well, that's not entirely true. We are British after all, so we actually started with a cup of tea. After thoroughly enjoying that cup of tea, we then had a discussion on what qualities and characteristics are, and the type of thing that we would like to see within our game. Having a look at the classic Space Invaders, we decided to keep it simple. And with simplicity in mind, we opened up a Google window and searched for LEGO spaceship. We found images that we liked and compiled them into a PureF board. For those unfamiliar with PureF, I suggest that you go onto their website, download it, start making your reference boards with it, and if you are able, throw them a little bit of money. In a move to transition from having reference images to actual game assets, we opened up Blender. Armed with our PureF board, we then moved to implement our design. We found a nice, sleek, sort of bird-like shape, and went with that. It reminded me somewhat of a swift, a bird that's common to our part of the world. We put our swift-like ship into an array and turned that single swift into a flock. Being relatively happy with our invading flock, we moved to create the second ship. We went back to our reference material. Our goal was now set on making the larger ship that would appear at the back of the Space Invaders field. This one. Right there. That one. We brought in a new cube, subdivided it, pushed, pulled, scaled. We then formed a new shape. Not like that which we wanted, we accidentally made a cat.
Meow.
We decided that despite the cat's familiar presence reminding us of our own pets, it wasn't quite suitable for the game. We will probably revisit the cat ship later. So we molded that shape just a little bit more. We decided that even though it looks a little bit like a house, that was enough. We used an array to make a little close of houses, added them to the invading flock, and we had a fine looking invasion. With an invasion force incoming, my son decided it was time to make the hero ship, or, as he says, every game needs a hero. We started crafting the ship according to my son's specifications. My son's input became somewhat demanding, so I decided it was time to push back on this slightly. I then insisted that we should have a little discussion and a negotiation on what should go into the ship. We practiced some teamwork, some listening, and compromise. The majority of my son's desires were still there, only with a few minor tweaks of my own. And with this new specification outlined, and with the video Space Invaders in mind, we created the ship. Having followed the guidance given by my son and my adjustments, we ended up with an awfully stubby looking ship. So we decided this would simply be the first iteration of the hero ship. We adjusted the model until both my boss and I were happy, and went on to detailing. We'd always kept in mind that the player's ship should have more details, as this would be the ship that you would spend the majority of time with in-game. We made an effort to keep things looking chunky as we decided where things would go. The hero would not only need a ship, but missiles to fire. So we proceeded to model the missiles, ensuring that things looked proportional. We slapped on a mirror modifier to see what things would look like if the ship was laden with the missiles. After a few loop cuts and some scaling, the missiles were ready. With the ship appropriately armed and ready to fight the invasion, we finished detailing the ship and finalizing the geometry of it. My son looked at me with all the passion an 8-year-old can muster, which is a lot, and said, "It's time for color." After having a small discussion on what qualities and characteristics can be derived from colors, we went on to decide on a color palette. We then compiled some of our favorite palettes from low spec into a single texture. We also made some gradients out of those palettes. So we have blank space within the texture that we intend to fill as time goes on with more palettes, with extra gradients, or other objects yet created. So with our Dulux chart, we went to paint the ships. We selected some faces, tested out some colors, experimented with a few combinations, and then chose lemon yellow. We wanted to provide a suggestion of an engine. My little man decided that purple was the color for this hero ship. We then lit up the boosters with an appropriately bright color, and then went through various options for the frame of the ship. We then turned our attention back to the missile. We didn't really have a plan for what the missile should look like, past we wanted it to match with the ship. So we took the missile out, messed with it somewhat, and then slotted it back right in its place. With the hero ship now looking suitably heroic, we turned our attention back to the invading fleet. We placed a nice gradient on the bird-like ship's grille and viewing platform. For a brief moment, we thought about making the cockpit detachable, and then decided that that's somewhat out of the scope of what we had discussed. We might revisit that later. I found that the default UV map for our simple models was really easy to set up a gradient on. All we needed to do was scale an axis to 0 and then move those UVs in the UV editor to the gradient. And done. We then linked the object data to the similar objects in the invading fleet, and it looked quite smashing. And then we swiftly moved on to the larger ship. As with the other ship, its default UV map was easy to apply gradient to. Scale an axis to 0, move the points over to your gradient, and done. For this ship's viewing platform, we used the same gradient. Going forward, we will probably use the same gradient on all viewing platforms on all enemy ships. At my son's behest, I then modded the VR game Tiny Town with our models. There is an option to make these modifications public, which isn't something I in principle mind. I am somewhat self-conscious, however, that these models were designed specifically to be viewed from the top or the front. So from beneath, they don't look so good. And this is something that he clearly has access to in the game. So I'm hesitant to make these particular modifications and models public. So for now at least, I'll probably just leave them for us to play with. With all of our 3D models now ready to go, we threw them into the Unity game engine. We added some colliders, some rigid bodies, we assigned some spawning positions, we set different speeds to each ship, we created a spawner to spawn in these ships at the given positions, and now we watch them march forward. At the moment we have a minor difficulty scaling in the game as our spawn rate increases with time. We have a shader effect applied to really accent the ship's destruction. This looks a lot better than the ship simply disappearing. There are other options that we'll explore later. My little colleague and I desired something else to liven the scene, and he said, "Stars." And I thought, I've heard that somewhere before. Stars. We hopped back over into Blender. We started by making a star mesh, made in the traditional sort of shape. It looked quite nice. It became clear very quickly that our stars had excess and needless geometry, and in fact, planes, basic simple planes, would do just as well. So that's what we did. Planes everywhere. Multiplied, rotated, scaled, repositioned. An emissive material slapped on top of them, and what you have is a fairly nice looking starfield. We then joined all of the planes together into a single object to make the field easily movable. We exported it, imported it into Unity, and here we are. And this dreamlike visage is where we currently stand. I do hope that you found our presentation here interesting. We will be back again soon. We are continuing to work on this project, adding some game mechanics, some more objects, some more art, and soon enough some sounds. And this has been Damien and Sons. Click over to this video, where I'm teaching my son Blender. Subscribe, like, ring the bell, and I'm wishing each and every one of you the best. Until next time, see you then.